Sometimes we want to paint something, but the reference is not perfect. So this is the case with this scene. I want the flowers to stand out, but they are pretty small. So what I want to do is to change the view, the angle of the view a little bit. And by the way, I'm using this Canson paper. It's on the reverse side so that I don't get that aggressive texture that the front side offers. I already made some changes to this scene in Photoshop, and right now I'm just going to start blocking in some areas with color in the values that I want. And right now it's more about the shapes. The main change was for me to make the background shorter so that it's like we bend lower to the ground and start seeing the flowers larger, basically. So the flowers would be like somewhere at this level, and of course when they're in the distance, maybe we'll see more like a pattern of color rather than the single flowers. What I do love in this picture, it's the depth. It offers me a way to play with the depth. Like we have this field, then we have another one which is already a cooler green, meaning kind of like more blue green, and then we have the trees in the distance that are already in a cooler blue. So it's kind of easier to set up the depth, and this pretty much is now the playground for the flowers. The very first thing I want to do when I start a painting is to decide where the sun is coming from, and that's important because that will determine how I'm shaping the values, meaning these trees, where is going to be their lighter side. And in this particular scene, the light is coming from the top right. So that's where the lighter greens are going to be. Not just here, but applied to everywhere. And now I'm going to start with the darker colors. And I'm just going to block in the overall shape. And the darkest colors are going to be at the bottom of the trees, not at the top, but there are still some darker colors at the top. But I'm going to have that shadow, those shadows, a little bit lighter. And this was darker purple color. Now I can also add some of the dark green here. But you see how there's a lot of that paper showing through, and our dark, rich color doesn't yet get a chance to become really dark and rich enough. It's a shape that I want, but it's not dark enough. So usually on a sanded paper, I would work with underpainting, and before my first layers of pastel, I usually would tone that area to the value that's going on top of it, but I cannot really do that here. This is not the paper that works with the underpainting, so this is the way I can eliminate some of that effect of the paper showing through those darker areas too much. And I don't want to just create flat color completely. I do like the texture, and even some of it peeking a little bit. That's kind of strategic. We still see this brown, rusty brown, but now there's a little bit more depth to that color. Eventually I'll have more layers, so it will darken it further, but it's a good start. So where are other darker areas? I want to add that as well. But here in the grass, there will be some of those darker sections, areas. And that's good to balance out the composition. I actually will exaggerate some of it. And right now you can see I'm mainly focusing on the shapes, not really on specific tree branches or single flowers, but It's all about the design, designing a painting. And then in the distance, there's another dark area, and that is the trees. So right now, I took the kind of dark blue, but I think it still needs that darker purple or another variation of darker purple or green in the distance, but it's not as intense as what we are going to see here. So maybe this green that I was using here, but in combination with that blue, cooler blue, it will give me enough of that darker value. Let's add a little bit of that blue showing through the branches here so that we have consistency. And if it's a little off, that's okay, because I'm going to modify it. It would be probably a good idea to even right now add the sky. It would be easier to understand what we are looking at, because this immediately is the mid-tone area for the field. And if I even lightly show that this is a lighter value, that will establish it as a sky. But I don't want yet to go start clashing this blue with the darker color here, or start having the spacing between the branches. But this is kind of a little bit, a hint is enough, because I want first to build up a little bit of the volume in the trees before I start carving with that blue into the color of the tree or trees. So I have the darker colors, and if I just go a little bit more forceful now with this, and here, this is very soft pastel, by the way. I think it's Sennelier. This, I believe it's called black green Sennelier color, and it really works well for the areas like this. And maybe a little bit more of this darker purple. And yeah, maybe like at this point I can even suggest how the tree trunks are going to be. So we also have the shadow here from the trees. So with the more pigment, it's going to start looking darker because it's covering up that color of the paper, which is a little bit lighter. And even here, maybe at this point, I can start suggesting some of these branches. Not going to get too tricky here. Just something believable. That's the area of shadow. Now, as it's rising from the ground, it will start picking up more light. And in the shadow, it's still going to be cooler green. So I'm using a cooler green like that. And if we squint our eyes right now, it's pretty close in value, but it does have more chroma, meaning we perceive it as having more color. It's not just like black or dark gray. It's certainly green, and I can start adding that into the shadows. So these darker parts of the trees that are not directly sunlit. And then, as the branches will start turning towards the sun, that's where I'm going to take the green that's lighter and has more yellow And I will start bringing some sunlight into those trees. So that is usually more towards the top, not at the branches at the bottom here. So that will start shaping up the trees. And I want this tree to let it go over the page, so it doesn't look like it's squished, that I'm trying to fit it in no matter what. I see that happening every now and then in my students' work, but it doesn't need to be. We don't need to fit the whole tree into the painting. We can crop the view in many different ways, so it doesn't have to be in the picture. But you don't want to basically get right to the top and kind of end that right there either. So it's either implies that it kind of runs off the page a little bit further, or create some kind of spacing here, but not that it just kind of sits right to the edge. So that's just composition. So we have some of this lighter color here, and I want to make sure I don't bring this light into areas where it's like deeper in the shadows. Staying closer towards the right edge and more towards the top. And right now I'm still working with a light pressure, and for one thing, I don't want to cover up the color of the paper completely. I actually do like that kind of rusty orange, how it warms up the greens, gives it some interest. I can still kind of push the greens a little bit further just for myself to decide what the lighter green color eventually be. So like that maybe. It is a little bit in the distance. I don't want it to become really bright. And sometimes using a cross-hatching style works out nice. Sometimes it's more like making a flat mark, kind of emphasizing that. But see how it starts kind of covering up that a little darker green that I used. And maybe actually this will need to be brought back a little bit. Get a little bit more of that blue back. So if I still want to get a little bit more of that cooler green, and in the shadows maybe here, that works. So now I have that color in the distance, and the trees that are closer to us, it is dark color in the distance, but there's also a certain atmospheric quality to it. So I want to bring a little bit more blue, just kind of soften it a little bit, and maybe even here show it in between. Definitely there will be some here, but I have to watch the horizontal line here. Of course, all of this is interpreted and exaggerated, and don't be afraid to do that. It's your work. I think it looks okay. Now, there's something else I like here. It's overlapping this lighter green color, more saturated green color, over that distant row of trees, and even goes into the sky a little bit. So I like things like that. I need to build up again a little bit more color here. It's not as cool, but it's still there's a section of the shadow in here. And then I can start using a little bit brighter greens here. going right into the sky a little bit, but the problem is it's going maybe to clash with that lighter blue a little bit, but here I'm safe. So I'm going to take care of that here first. And it's actually overlapping here in the picture, but I'm not sure if I want to do that. But we do have some of those kind of branches here growing that overlap that tree. So that could be interesting. So here maybe just kind of create some texture within the shadow area. Suggest some of the dark color, but at the same time working very lightly, not pressing too hard. If it starts looking a little bit too similar, right now again it's kind of blocking stage still. So these trees are a little cooler. This is where we have warmer greens. So eventually this is where my warmer greens are going to be. And they also will contrast with that meadow or field that is cooler blue behind it. And I can actually bring it pretty soon, bring it in. Now I have to take care of either the sky or the field, the meadow. So maybe let's first actually get this cooler color in the distant field. And now as I'm working again, it should be a very light pressure and kind of make sure it lines up if I want to show it in the distance, so it's at the same level, so it doesn't jump up or too low. And we see it through the tree branches a little bit, but I don't want to create a very sharp edge between that field and the branches, so it's just suggested softly, and then I can overlay some branches of the trees over that. So where it's more open, I can do that, but even then maybe like having completely flat color is not the best choice. So then I can here again suggest that, and maybe showing through the tree trunk somewhere a little bit. So that creates the transparency in the trees. And as far as the field, what is going to happen to that? Well, I do have the darker areas, right? Oh, it's very tempting. Okay. I also want to kind of create color passages for the flowers, particularly when they're closer to us, and more of the color as opposed to one flower here, one flower there. And then in the distance, like I said, it's going to be seen a little bit more like, you know, zigzagging into the distance. And it doesn't have to be just purple. I can bring different colors, a little bit warmer purple maybe too, so that we have the variations. And I'm going to put warmer purple closer to us, so this way it visually is closer, kind of, because colors in the distance are looking a little cooler usually. And I like that the color of the paper itself is a little bit, or quite a bit I should say, warmer. So it already sets the stage the way I want it to be. And then I can just start maybe like either creating marks like that to carve into that purple a little bit, though it doesn't have to be just that. I can also just do that with the flat side of the stick, but very lightly right now. And the reason I didn't just grab the green right away is that I want to build up the color that's below the green, underneath. So it starts looking a little bit deeper, having more depth. And here I have this darker greens, but now I can add a little bit of this darker brown. That brings a little bit more warmth into the shadows. And even here, like in some of these parts. And then in the distance, it's going to get lighter. So I don't really want to start blending it here because this is still pretty light area. It's kind of lighter mid-tone in certain areas here. But overall, the horizontal space, horizontal plane of the landscape is getting more light. So it's going to be lighter, but I already have these nice blues established here, some of these darker colors. If I just start blending this right now, if these start mixing up, it will gray it down. But here I'm kind of trying to preserve some of these blues and purples here, and then just some areas of brown. But if you really want to get something, you know, like having a little bit more depth, then maybe in the area of the browns or darker greens, you can do that. But I wouldn't recommend to start mixing your blues and dark greens and dark brown colors. Now I can also start adding a little bit of green to the grass, to the areas of the grass. And I'm trying to keep it light because I know I still want to add some detail to that, and if it's too saturated with pigment, it will be very difficult to do. And I want to get the grass lighter, but I'm starting with some color that's a little bit darker than the final color will be. So that starts giving me some idea. It's definitely lighter than what's within the trees. And maybe like somewhere here. It also helps as you're working on something, it helps to step back and take a look at what's on paper, because sometimes when we're too close, it's hard to see how the parts of the picture relate to each other. Where I could use a little bit of blending maybe in the sky, but right now there's very little pigment there, very little blue pigment, that it's not going to even blend well. So I would either need to build up a little bit of this pigment first, but now I'm getting into this area of the trees, and that's going to be fun to carve the branches and the sky openings in this shape of green. But right now it does give me a little bit of idea what we're going to see there, what the shape is. And I would suggest working really light in the areas where there are those darker greens. And actually I would switch to even a little bit darker blue, the purplish blue, for this area where the darker colors are. If it's the sky that we see, the smaller area of the sky that we see through the branches, darker branches. And even on the edges here. But not only, there's also this part, right? So some of the sky, we can actually see that through those distant trees. But it has to be very soft. The edges should be very soft if we show that. And the top also. I want it to be very softly kind of feathered into the sky. That will keep it in the distance and will stop it from coming forward too much. And if I have to, I can just do something like this to soften it. So I start seeing how my trees are going to start looking, and I'm not going to try to get every single spot of the sky showing through that. My main goal is here to build the shape, kind of three-dimensional looking shape, and I'll show a little bit of transparency there within the branches, a little bit more sky between the tree trunks, but not so much. Not going to get very concerned about getting the exact tree trunks as in the reference. So now I can also use a little bit of cross-hatching with a harder pastel. That will do two things. It will give me those vertical marks to create that the texture of the grass, but it also blends the color underneath if needed. But I don't really have that much color yet, but what I want to do is get that a little bit lighter value going within the grass, because I want to see that lighter. Or does it have to be a hard pastel? Well, not necessarily. It's just something that's easier to do cross-hatching with if I want that effect, but it kind of doesn't really leave much color right now. But you can see the effect actually. That's getting those lighter areas here. And definitely contrasting with the greens of the trees more, and even with the greens over here. Now I feel like this could use a little bit more depth. So in the distance, I'll push that blue towards the edge of the trees and still keep it a little bit more greener, kind of turquoise color there. And if I show it in between these branches, again, kind of creates a little bit more transparency between the shape of this bush. So if I have to rely on that particular color, the hard pastel, it could get quite tedious. So that's what soft pastels are for. I can get the job done a lot faster as far as covering the larger areas with the color on the side of the stick, and it deposits more pigment, and that creates richer, deeper color. So what I want to happen here is not to just kind of take the same color and use it for this whole area, but kind of create a little bit of a movement here. Maybe some of this lighter color showing here, and maybe here connecting with that. But it's not just kind of flat area of the same color. So it could even be in this area as well, but I'm not ready for that yet. And if I still want to make it a little bit varied with a slightly darker green, I can do that. And I think I like how it starts getting that kind of nice summer look, light here. And you see how if I start carving with the green into these purple shapes now, I start shaping them like flowers. They start looking more like flowers. Those long purple flowers. I tried to find a name before making this video, but I didn't really see the name for them. So the best I could do is purple flowers. Summer purple flowers. And they mentioned that the bees love them too, so that much I know. And I don't want them all to be like broken up into these single long flowers. Some of that can merge into the larger shapes, and that will look more interesting. And now this brown, I can also add some detail on top of that. And maybe with a slightly darker color here. Actually, let's get some of this cooler green. And even here for some of this. Start creating more interest here and even here. And sometimes the color underneath, or actually very often, the color underneath is just for the value, basically. Like to create that darker value so that I can bring a little bit more green color, but also here it's definitely closer to us and it's not a very deep shadow, so having some of that warmer brown helps to keep it sunnier looking. Right, so now let's get some of the brighter greens into the picture. So here I can start kind of creating maybe like single stems, single leaves of the grasses. Make sure they are larger because they are closer to us, and that will exaggerate a little bit, of course, the distance. We don't see them that large in the picture, but it doesn't really matter because here I'm just exaggerating that, and seeing a little bit more detail here definitely helps with that. And because I have that darker background here, see how much easier it is for me to show the detail. So here in the distance I can start kind of adding a little bit of the kind of zigzagging color, showing that the flowers are pretty small there, that maybe we see the tops of the flowers. But closer to us, there will be more detail, more color, more definition. And there are also white flowers there in the reference, and I can add that as well. Well, here where we kind of get to the limitation of the non-sanded paper. It gets difficult to do what I'm trying to do here. So because I already saturated the paper with that green, it's harder to add that purple on top. So maybe just a little bit more with the marks like this. It's easier. And kind of build the connection with this part a little bit. So it's kind of going like this. And there will be more, of course. More flowers on this side as well. It really depends on how much we are going to add. But the best way is not to start adding them all around, but kind of create a little bit of a movement and maybe kind of keep it more simple. It's easier to say that than to stop in time, but it does really look better when it's not just overly kind of filled with flowers. Something like that, and maybe a little bit here will be easier to add, just as a little bit of color in the background. Okay, then there's a little bit more I can do. Maybe here, because we have that dark, I can create even lighter shapes. I could use maybe like something like this. Create those stems that are actually a little lighter than what's behind. I'm trying to find the right color, so it's not very white, but still looking light. It's kind of harder, a little bit harder pastel here. It's not hard pastel, but it is firmer stick. So maybe like something lighter like this, if I want to bring more light into this area, to show that it's catching the light here, at least some of its stems, tops of the grasses. And since I have that, maybe adding a little bit of that here. Or is it too light? I think it's a little too light. So what to do? It's already there, right? Well, I can maybe like take a little bit more color and tone it down. But when I'm working, I want to try things out, and particularly on non-sanded paper, when it actually is meant as a study, pretty much. I want to see what will happen if I want to tweak a color a certain way. And right now I'm adding warmth to the green with this kind of brighter, warmer ochre, but that warmth really should be closer to us, and as it's receding, it should be getting a bit cooler. It's a little bright, but it is cooler green. And it's firmer again, and for this paper, right now it's a deal breaker. Well, how about this? This is a soft pastel. Yeah, I think it's working. So anyway, that's the principle, and I can go on for a long time here trying to get the exact variations of green that I'm after. But let's just move on and add a little bit more detail to other areas. I have the purple flowers, maybe not as pronounced, but I do have them. So maybe they need a little bit of a shadow side. Those that are closer to us maybe need a little bit more detail so that they can stand out a little bit more. And just a few, really, probably enough. And I don't want them to be everywhere looking the same. So some of them are going to have a little bit more red color, maybe like this again. And that's being looking a little weird there. So let's break it up. Well, now it's more like about color spots too. Of course, I can push it even further, adding a little bit more light to it at the edge. And we can actually look at it closer. And we might see that happening. So it might bring more interest. And not all of them. I still want to keep that range of purples, but in some areas, maybe like get that more of a cluster. Get that lighter color. Exaggerated. And that adds more light as well. And that was very light, kind of purple color. It could be also light blue, more blue. Maybe something like that. There are a lot of white flowers there too. I don't know if I want to kind of mess with that right now. It just seems like it might overwhelm it. So let's get here. I kind of like the idea of this taller plant. Kind of silhouetted against that. Kind of echoes the darker shape on the other side of the picture. And let's see, the green that I want for that, maybe it's that cooler green is the second dark color here. Okay, something here that maybe would be nice is a little bit more saturated, kind of greener color before it gets cooler in the distance. And having kind of streaks of that in here and even in here. So it's more connected. Like I like the light that this lighter color brought in, but it's just kind of sitting by itself for the most part. And when I brought that color in, it just was a little too light. So here, not really, not this. I would switch to a little bit cooler green. And let's bring some white flowers maybe there. And I'm going to start with a color that's a little bit not as pure white. And I don't really want pure white. I always want a little bit of a hint of a different color. And maybe here, let's use some of this warmer color, particularly on the side that's more turned towards the sun. Maybe we have some of it here. Now it can get quite messy right now. So it's better to keep it more simple. But if you have some time to play with this, you can see what works better. I think they are called Queen Anne's lace. What I'm trying to attempt here, actually not even what you see in the picture, but those like little umbrella like flowers. But they add a nice lighter color. I like that. So maybe in the distance, kind of this light blue. I can suggest a little bit of that. So that's pretty much it for the flowers, I think. So I definitely brought more interest here, again, for something that I would work a little bit longer and on a sanded paper. I would spend more time on that, but here that's basically the roadmap, how I would approach it. So let's get a little bit more detail. Like here, for example, we have this glowing greens against the background, against that cooler background. So I'm going to use this more yellow green and create this beautiful edge. So it can get a little too much too, because I already have a lot of flowers here that are calling for attention. But I think it's okay to show this kind of backlit greens. They support this kind of nice sunny look within the field. And even here, like some of these greens can get a little bit more. A little bit more emphasis, because maybe here let's get a little bit more interest going with this silhouetted branches. Just a hint, kind of to show that that greener grass is showing through this tall branches here. And that's an interesting detail then. Then if we look at the picture, there's like lighter greens here and actually cooler greens, and it doesn't mean that they're atmospheric, but just the plant itself seems to be having that cooler green within the leaves. So that happens, and that's okay, but now also kind of can create a little bit of this thinner detail here. Some of the stems for this. And I like this green actually here too. So maybe that's a little too repetitive there. This is now pretty much going for tops of the grasses, those lighter tops. Probably should just leave it alone. So how to do that? Well, maybe I can just remove some of that. the color is too compressed at that point, too compact. It starts blending too much. So at this point, I think it's just about the sky, giving a little bit more light to the sky. So that color in the trees, the darker blue that I created before, it's kind of came before the outside of the trees. And now with a blue that's a little bit more green, I can add that more pigment that eventually it will start covering up the color of the paper. It's becoming a little too flat if I press on it too hard. And let's give a little bit here, a little bit of blue. And it's becoming a lovely summertime scene. And now the blue that we see further up in the sky, that is a little bit darker and has more red in it. So the blue that's closer to the horizon usually is kind of closer to the cerulean blue. If you worked in watercolors, if you worked in oils, you would refer to those colors by those names, but in pastels, they don't give us those names necessarily. They just come up with all sorts of different names. But the idea is that greener blue is that blue that in other mediums would be called cerulean blue. So I can do something like that. Oops, start breaking off. And maybe a little bit tone down that. So if we look closer, we don't really see those harder edges, and I could do something like this to soften this with a little plastic card that I'm using here. I wouldn't suggest to just blend it because this is easier to wipe and it's more precise where I want to scrape it. So I also want to show maybe a little bit of that paper, color of the paper. It's just kind of nice. It just brings more energy into it. But if I want to tone it down maybe a little bit on the shadow side, I could use hard pastel here for this. And create a little bit more of that softer shadow look. And adding a little bit of blue to the shadow areas is actually creating a little bit more atmospheric color. And it also kind of connects with the blues that we already have in the other areas. So we can have it within the tree a little bit as well. And that's the idea. That's how I would approach this. And you can see it's totally possible to change the picture, to change the composition to your liking and get away with it. And let's see, in the distance, maybe I want to add even lighter blue. So this kind of like a blue purple. Because it seems like a little too dark, kind of gloomy. Here we have the trees silhouetted against that lighter color, a little bit nicer. And even at the bottom, there. Maybe just having a blue color would work a little better, kind of more blue. Yeah, I think I like it. It definitely has a hint of green, but just giving it a little bit more chroma. I think that worked. And let's see if it's a little more chroma still. Interesting. I wouldn't eliminate the other color entirely, but it's kind of interesting. And this is quite chromatic blue. So would this work? The brush? Yes. Okay, I think the sky looks pretty good. The only thing, maybe I could warm it up just a touch with this pinkish purple, and that just brings a little bit more warmth. See how it builds up? Wipe it off before you go into the sky. Now if it starts looking a little flat, I can add a little bit more of that darker color, kind of again zigzagging it in, so it kind of leads your lighter areas, darker areas. And also, if I want to add a little bit more spacing between the tree trunks, so this maybe is a good area here, less build up. So this would be the tree trunk, like we see that there, maybe here. And I'm using that darker purple here that I was using before, not for the shadows, not this dark purple, but lighter. And kind of trying to find maybe where that would make sense, having the branches so that they kind of go up, and I can put a little bit more emphasis on that darker line, darker tree trunk. But don't make it just all kind of running through all foliage in front of the foliage, because it's obscured by that. Like there would be some of that green color in front of it. So here we have some of the tree trunk showing, but we also have the branches overlapping it in front. So that's what you want to pay attention to. So it's not just kind of like kids drawing with a tree trunk and then everything equally on the other side. Kind of visualize how the tree trunk is going through the tree and where it might show through. Like this, maybe again showing here a little bit more. And as it goes upwards, it's going to be thinner than it is at the bottom. So I can still bring back some of that dark green and maybe reinforce some of the darker green color here at the bottom, and then back again with this cool green in the shadow on top of the branches. And even here you can be missing a little bit of that. And then again, if I want to show a little bit of that sky within the tree, I will use a somewhat darker blue, kind of more towards the purples, particularly there in the shadow area. And that's pretty much it. maybe the other lighter green somewhere here, just to highlight a little bit the top of the branches of the green in the shadow. But that's it. So I have a little bit of light showing through there, and here where the openings are larger, or even here just kind of within, if it's large enough, I can create a little bit lighter color, lighter blue. But overall, why we don't use very light blue within? Because it's just going to stand out quite a bit. Then it will be very, very conspicuous. So what I want to do is to create the kind of like darker area first, and if it's large enough, like let's say here for example, then within that area maybe I'll add a little bit of that lighter color. So that's my take on this scene. By the way, I can actually add a little bit of this lighter, warmer color again to just bring more warmth in here. That's it. That's what I wanted to show today, how to take this scene, modify it a little bit and make it your own so that you can showcase what you actually wanted to showcase. And here it was the flowers, and it also was kind of these beautiful trees. That was the flowers, not kind of very specific single flowers, but the whole field of flowers without zooming in on them too much. But at the same time, how they're creating more interest within this scene. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and please give it a like if you did, and I will see you in the next video.